John Deere is struggling under the weight of President Trump's economic policies. The American icon is down 29% from last year.
So the point is that with all these doggone tariffs that the president has put on, it's increased the cost of new equipment. It costs more for the farmer to buy.
Across the American heartland, farmers are living through a crisis that is not of their making. When President Trump expanded tariffs in 2025, the stated goal was to bring manufacturing and jobs back home. Instead, the first people to feel the strain have been farmers. John Deere, the most recognizable name in farm equipment, reported losses of $300 million this year and warned of another $300 million by the end of 2025. The company's stock has dropped nearly 30% compared to last year, and more than 200 employees have been laid off. For farmers, every broken part or delayed machine is now more expensive, while their crops sell for less abroad. This is the starting point of today's story, one that contrasts sharply with how Canada has chosen to respond.
Because of the trade and the tariffs, a lot of our customers have said, the heck with the United States, we're not buying your commodities anymore. So things like hard red winter wheat are at an all-time low for the amount of price we get at the farm gate.
The daily math on a farm has become brutal. Import tariffs have disrupted the supply of tractor bearings, fertilizer, and chemicals. Costs rise each season, squeezing budgets already stretched thin. At the same time, export markets are closing off. Hard red winter wheat now commands one of its lowest prices at the farm gate. Many farmers warn that younger growers without financial reserves will not survive these conditions. When expenses keep climbing while grain prices fall, there is no margin left to invest or even to break even. Even established producers face the risk of going under if this cycle continues. What was meant as an economic strategy to revive American strength has instead put farm families directly in the crosshairs.
We're announcing today that we're acting to protect Canada's agriculture and seafood industries. I'm going to focus on Canadian canola, which has been hit with Chinese tariffs.
North of the border, Prime Minister Mark Carney recently unveiled what he called the most wide-ranging trade resilience package in the country's history. At its center is a new $5 billion Canadian fund designed to help businesses retool, diversify, and remain competitive. The plan includes retraining for 50,000 workers, an extension of employment insurance up to 65 weeks for long-tenured employees, and a streamlined job matching program. Just as significant is the introduction of a binding Buy Canadian policy, requiring federal agencies and crown corporations to prioritize Canadian suppliers when awarding contracts. For agriculture, the measures go even further. With canola exports facing Chinese tariffs and beef and lobster also under pressure, Ottawa pledged $370 million Canadian in biofuel incentives tied to canola production. Loan limits for farmers were raised to $500,000, and new funding was earmarked for international marketing to open fresh outlets. These steps do not eliminate the pain of global tariffs, but they demonstrate a clear attempt to cushion the blow and prepare producers for the next phase of competition. The contrast between these two strategies could not be sharper. In the United States, sweeping tariffs were applied almost overnight, leaving farmers trapped between higher costs and weaker sales. In Canada, the government chose to build a broad safety net while also pushing industries to adapt and diversify. Both countries faced the same global turbulence, but one is forcing its producers to shoulder the burden directly, while the other is spreading that burden through public policy. For farm families on either side of the border, the outcome is deeply personal. In the U.S., uncertainty threatens livelihoods that have lasted generations. In Canada, the government is betting that timely support and structural change will protect rural communities from collapse. The question ahead is whether America will continue on a path that leaves its farmers exposed, or whether it will learn from its neighbors' attempt to match resilience with responsibility.
In the news, Prime Minister Mark Carney, of course, announcing a new $1.2 billion aid package for Canada's softwood lumber industry. Now, the news comes just after the U.S. government announced an increase in anti-dumping duties on the sector, going from 7% to just over 20%.
Billions of dollars a month of softwood lumber now jammed up at 35% tariff.
When President Trump raised tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber to 35% at the start of August, the decision was presented as a bold measure to restore American industry. Yet the reality is more complex. Canadian lumber makes up the majority of wood used in American housing construction, and this is not a product that the U.S. can replace overnight. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, Canadian softwood lumber has consistently supplied well over 3/4 of U.S. imports during the past decade. Every extra duty imposed raises the cost of building homes, schools, and even furniture. At a moment when mortgage rates remain high, this added burden risks pushing more families out of the housing market. For builders already facing tight margins, the tariff is not just a trade measure. It is a direct hit to the cost of doing business.
Now Canada is lifting some of these retaliatory tariffs, as you know. The government is actually alleviating some of the pressure on the U.S.
Prime Minister Mark Carney chose not to respond in kind across the board. Ottawa removed most retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, while keeping steel, aluminum, and autos protected. Some viewed this as a retreat, but it was in fact a calculated defense. Canada highlighted the true pressure point: softwood lumber. The United States cannot simply cut Canada out of the market because domestic production falls far short of national demand. Alternative suppliers in Europe or South America cannot match Canada's scale or logistical advantage. This reality makes Trump's strategy a gamble that hits his own voters as much as his northern neighbor. For Ottawa, the decision to step back on lesser items while holding the line on critical sectors underscored that Canada is not fighting blindly. It is protecting leverage where it matters most, using economic facts rather than political noise. Domestically, Carney's choice reflects political and economic realities. He leads a minority government, meaning every move is under the microscope of opposition leaders. Critics, including Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, argue that easing tariffs weakens Canada's hand. But Carney's strategy aligns with the advice of premiers and industry leaders. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has already warned that Trump could reopen SUSMA as early as November, 2 years before the scheduled 2026 review. That looming threat makes it vital for Canada to demonstrate stability now. By pursuing progress on softwood lumber, Carney can deliver relief for Canadian forestry communities and reduce costs for U.S. consumers, a win-win that strengthens his position at home. The decision also positions Canada as a responsible actor, willing to de-escalate without sacrificing its core interests. It is an approach that values patience and timing, elements often overlooked in trade battles that dominate headlines. Softwood lumber is not just another trade issue. It has become the symbol of how Canada responds to American pressure. Trump set the stage by raising tariffs, but the structure of North American supply chains limits how far Washington can push. Canada has shown that it can adapt, choosing when to ease tensions and when to defend its most vital industries. Far from capitulation, this is a sign of resilience. By using lumber as the test case, Ottawa has proved it can protect workers, defend national interests, and still present itself as a credible partner. The outcome will shape not only the price of homes across America, but also the credibility of Canada's strategy as it approaches the all-important USMCA review in 2026. In this fight, Canada is not bending. It is showing that leverage, wisely used, is more powerful than tariffs shouted from a podium.
President Trump's 50% tariff on most imported copper products has fueled a surge in copper prices. While the import tax might not increase the production of the metal in the United States, it has led to another domestic spike: copper thefts.
When President Donald Trump announced a 50% tariff on imported copper products under Section 232, he framed it as a matter of national security aimed at China, the world's largest producer of refined copper. Yet the shock was felt most in the U.S. itself. Futures markets plunged, and the price gap between copper traded in the U.S. and London jumped to 31%, the highest ever recorded. Instead of stability, the policy created disruption and volatility. The most immediate impact was not a revival of U.S. copper production, but a rise in costs. copper prices surged as much as 35% over the past year, according to CBS News, creating an unexpected side effect, a wave of copper thefts across the country. The U.S. National Insurance Crime Bureau estimates that copper theft has become a nearly $2 billion annual problem. From phone lines in California cut repeatedly by thieves to Los Angeles bridges stripped of copper wiring, the consequences have been severe. Local governments are spending millions to repair damages worth only a fraction of what the thieves gained on the black market. For manufacturers, the tariff means higher input costs for appliances, vehicles, and electronics, eroding competitiveness. Instead of reinforcing national security, the tariff has created insecurity at home, straining infrastructure and exposing communities to new risks. The intended shield for U.S. industry has turned into a domestic burden.
Canada produces a good amount of copper, but ships a lot of it off to Asia for processing, and then it goes into the United States. So maybe the impact is more on the U.S. consumer than on Canadian businesses.
Canada was quickly caught in the crossfire, since much of its copper is refined in Asia before entering the U.S. market. But Ottawa has not remained passive. More than 85% of bilateral trade continues tariff-free under CUSMA, giving Canada a base of stability. Prime Minister Mark Carney has pressed for diversification into Europe and Asia, while encouraging a buy-Canadian movement at home. Provinces have begun tearing down barriers to interprovincial trade, creating a stronger domestic market. Carney also suspended Canada's digital services tax, worth about $1 billion Canadian dollars annually, to keep negotiations with Washington open. At the same time, Canada continues to hold leverage in energy and critical minerals. By moving deliberately rather than reacting impulsively, Canada has shown it can turn pressure into opportunity. China, the intended target, has also found ways to adapt. The company Wellicent invested early in a factory in Grand Prairie, Texas, which will produce 3,000 tons of copper flat wire a year for clients such as Stellantis. Because production is inside the U.S., it avoids the tariff entirely. With $100 million of additional investment planned, the plant is expected to deliver more than half of the firm's overseas revenue within 3 years. A tariff designed to curb Chinese influence has instead created an opening for a Chinese company to profit on American soil. Globally, the copper market remains unstable. Analysts warn that the collapse in futures prices, combined with weaker demand in China, signals deflationary pressure, with risks spreading far beyond the metals sector.
Trump's copper tariff was meant to showcase strength, but its effects tell another story. It has fueled crime and costs at home, pushed allies like Canada to strengthen their independence, and even allowed Chinese firms to find new advantages. Canada has responded with patience and strategy, proving it can defend its interests without losing its leverage. What remains clear is that the tariff has backfired, undermining the very goals it was meant to achieve.
America is the country that started the AI race, and as President of the United States, I'm here today to declare that America is going to win it.
When it comes to AI data centers, they are an order of magnitude more power hungry than the data centers we are used to since the internet age.
After August 1st, negotiations with China and Canada remained at a standstill. And Trump's latest tariff moves are now colliding with America's rising demand for energy and critical minerals to fuel its AI and manufacturing ambitions. Behind those headlines is a reality Trump can't afford to overlook. The United States relies heavily on Canadian supply, and in the race to lead in AI and semiconductor production, losing that connection would hurt Washington far more than Ottawa.
I think the biggest concern, and the one that the industry itself really needs to address, is the energy usage. That is just huge. The industry and the energy producers have got to figure that out. They've got to find a better way of providing that energy.
Trump's latest tariff push is now colliding with America's surging demand for energy, the same power needed to fuel AI data centers and bring semiconductor manufacturing back home. His proposal for a 100% tariff on imported chips is designed to pressure companies into building or investing in U.S. facilities. Apple, for example, pledged $100 billion in new American projects. That kind of industrial build-out comes with a hidden cost: electricity. In Virginia, home to the largest data center market in the world, Dominion Energy projects that demand could double over the next 15 years. AI data centers alone can draw more than a gigawatt on a single campus. And Virginia is only one example. Across the United States, from Oregon's server farms to Texas's tech corridors, AI data centers are multiplying, each requiring massive and continuous power. Furthermore, bringing semiconductor fabrication home will add to the load. All of it depends on reliable, large-scale energy supply. And that's where Canada's role becomes unavoidable.
So when I talk about being an energy superpower, I always say in both clean and conventional energies. So what does that mean? Yes, it does mean oil and gas. It means using our oil and gas. It also means more exports, without question.
Canada is already America's largest energy supplier. According to 2024 trade data, the U.S. imported roughly 3.8 to 4.3 million barrels of Canadian crude oil per day. Natural gas imports from Canada averaged about 8.5 billion cubic feet per day, up 7% from the year before. Electricity flows across the border totaled about 11.4 terawatt hours, enough to power roughly 1 million U.S. homes for a year. Uranium from Canada made up around 27% of total U.S. imports, the largest share of any country, sustaining a big part of America's nuclear fleet. On top of that are critical minerals.
We bring as interlocutors here all of the critical minerals of Ontario. So, for example, nickel. Nickel is something that comes from Ontario. It's high grade and it's not replaceable from other places in the world.
Ontario's high-grade nickel has no domestic substitute in the U.S. for certain defense and battery applications. British Columbia's germanium is essential for fiber optics, solar panels, and night vision systems. And the Teck smelter in Trail is the only Canadian source. These are not commodities that can be swapped in from other suppliers without years of supply chain adjustments. If these flows were disrupted, the ripple effects would be immediate. Industrial plants, data centers, and chip fabs would face higher costs and possible delays, and replacing Canada's unique mix of proximity, scale, and stability would be extremely difficult.
We can be an energy superpower. We have all the components in nuclear, in hydro, in potentially in carbon capture and storage, which is going to be one of the determinants of competitiveness.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has chosen not to rush into a deal. His strategy is to keep dialogue open, but refuse terms that would weaken Canada's long-term position. He's accelerating investment in domestic extraction and processing of energy and minerals, and reinforcing Canada's value to allies beyond North America. By signaling readiness to cooperate, but also the capacity to stand alone, Carney is making clear that Canada is not cornered. The message to Washington is that Canada's resources are a shared strength, but only if the partnership is respected. Pushing too far could backfire. Without Canadian energy and minerals, U.S. industries risk higher costs, slower growth, and greater dependence on less reliable partners, a dangerous prospect for an administration promising a manufacturing revival and AI leadership. In this mutual dependency, Canada holds leverage that matters more to U.S. stability than the other way around, and Trump must decide whether the price of sidelining Canada is worth any gains at the table.
35% tariff is now in place on some Canadian goods. And one Canadian industry that Washington has taken particular issue with is dairy.
In early August 2025, President Donald Trump took another step in his aggressive trade strategy. He raised tariffs on Canadian non-USMCA goods from 25% to 35%, escalating tensions at the border. Although the dairy sector itself is not directly hit by these new tariffs, Canada's dairy supply management system has long been a thorn in Trump's side. For years, he has portrayed it as an unfair barrier that protects Canadian farmers while limiting U.S. access to the market. Now, with broader tariffs in place and trade talks under strain, the question is whether Trump can force change in a policy Canada has vowed to defend at all costs.
Supply management is designed to protect dairy farms. There are limits to how much Canadian dairy farms can produce and how much from the United States can be imported to Canada.
Canada's supply management controls how much dairy is produced domestically and how much foreign product can enter the market. Imports from the U.S. are capped at roughly 3.5% of Canada's dairy market. If that limit is exceeded, tariffs skyrocket, 241% on milk and nearly 298.5% on butter, according to the Canadian Border Services Agency. The system has been in place for over 6 decades, designed to keep prices stable and protect thousands of family-run farms from being outcompeted by massive U.S. operations that can house tens of thousands of cows.
The dairy industry falls under CUSMA regulations, but U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly complained, saying it's an unfair deal for his country's producers.
From Washington's perspective, this is the very definition of a trade barrier. American producers already send about $800 million worth of dairy products to Canada annually, while Canada exports roughly $300 million in dairy south of the border. To Trump and his allies, the limits, and the high tariffs beyond them, mean lost opportunities for U.S. farmers. Just weeks before these latest tariff increases, Canada's parliament passed legislation that forbids using supply management as a bargaining chip in future trade negotiations. The bill enjoyed cross-party support, with advocates pointing to past trade deals where portions of the market were conceded despite political promises to protect it. Now, any government that wants to change the system would have to repeal the law and pay a steep political price. This protection isn't just about Quebec, the heartland of Canadian dairy. Farmers in British Columbia, Alberta, and even the Northwest Territories see supply management as essential for economic stability. It's a rare national consensus in an often divided political landscape. Canadian officials, including Prime Minister Mark Carney, know what's at stake. Loosening supply management too far could allow foreign dairy to take up to 18% of the domestic market, a level that industry groups warn would undermine the system entirely. That could mean farm closures, job losses, and declining rural economies. Beyond defending dairy, Canada has leverage of its own. The U.S. relies heavily on Canadian energy, critical minerals, and integrated auto supply chains. These sectors give Ottawa bargaining power that extends far beyond milk and butter. In trade talks, it's not just about defending one industry. It's about maintaining a balanced, mutually beneficial agreement. Trump may have expected the same playbook to work here as it has elsewhere: apply tariffs, demand changes, and secure a quick win. Instead, Canada's legal safeguards and political unity have slowed the process to a crawl. The dairy sector remains protected, with Ottawa signaling it is ready to walk away from a bad deal rather than concede on supply management. Meanwhile, U.S. dairy producers still face oversupply, volatile prices, and stiff competition abroad. Higher tariffs on other Canadian goods risk hurting American importers more than they help U.S. farmers, a reminder that not every bluff works in Washington's favor.